again, coming to you again straight from Cal.Extra. Today we are going to be talking about something that seems a bit tangential from the game I'm playing right now. We're going to be talking about the Romantic era of literature. You may be asking yourself, what does the Romantic era of literature have to do with the Devil May Cry games? Well, in general, you'd be correct. It has nothing to do with the Devil May Cry games in general, but rather to do with a specific character that was introduced in this particular title. V is his name, and unlike his companions, Nero and Dante, who are using the more traditional form of contact unit in the Devil May Cry games, namely pistols, a sword, and other such powers, V uses the power of poetry, specifically the poetry of William Blake, one of the foremost Romantic poets in the United Kingdom during the Romantic era. You may not recognize him from name alone, but you've probably heard some of his selections from his magnum opus, Tales of Innocence and Experience. If you've ever heard anyone referring to Tiger, Tiger, burning bright in the darkness of the night, who composed thy hand and eye, something, something, symmetry. Look, I don't know if it's memorized, but that's basically what it says. So, for instance, I'm just going to press this R2 button. Yeah, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but when I press the R2 button, V here will take out his little book of poetry and he'll start reciting some William Blake. So the reason we are discussing the Romantic era is because he was one of the foremost poets from this era. I should probably clarify, what is the Romantic era, what defined the Romantic era, and why it is still so appealing to this day. The Romantic era of poetry comes after the Classical era of literature, or Neoclassical if you will. Now, the Classical era of literature was largely obsessed with things like, logic and classical values, as in classical going back to the ancient Greeks and such. But after this era came a sort of reactionary era known as the Romantic era, which was more focused on the emotions of poetry rather than, say, the nitty-gritty factual aspects of poetry such as form. Well, I mean, there was still form, but not to the strict degree that one would find in a classical era piece of literature. Now, classical era was not just about poetry, as you may have probably guessed. Another important aspect, obviously, was the novels written during this era. Another thing you must note is that the Romantic era was timed very differently in that it started probably in England or Germany or one of the European countries, but it took maybe, I'd say, a couple decades later for it to reach to the Americas. But believe me, in form and function, the Romantic era as it appeared in both the United States and the United Kingdom and other such countries was actually still quite similar. So, we should probably start with the Romantic era in the United Kingdom, with a novel that if you do not recognize by actual reading, you might recognize by reputation. Frankenstein. Frankenstein, as written by Romantic author Mary Shelley, was one of the foremost novels of the Romantic era, and like many novels of its kind, it dealt with kind of the emotional themes dealing with the question of, if you were to create or bestow a corpse with human life, how would you feel? You're a corpse, you've been dead forever, and now all of a sudden you have this new sense of, well, being alive. So, Frankenstein's monster is dealing with an identity crisis, as you will, throughout the course of the novel. And the man himself, the Dr. Victor Frankenstein, has to deal with the fact that he has bestowed life upon this creature and is shirked any responsibility from the creature ever since his creation. And that is essentially the basic theme that runs through the course of the novel, and it is one of the deals with many of the key themes that are often associated with the Romantic era. Another piece of literature that came out of the Romantic era, now we're finally starting to get into poetry here, was, as I mentioned before, William Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience. It dealt with the attitudes that were associated with, just starting to come into the world. Everything is all fresh and new. Nothing has been tainted by what you'll experience when you grow older and such and mature. While the songs of experience deal with the person that has actually been through the world and see how awful and at times terrifying it can be, and such an individual's reaction to all of that. Now, the songs of innocence are typified by one particular song, in particular, Little Lamb, Who Made Thee? In the naivete of the young person, life is as pure and as innocent, as sweet as the little lamb. But as the little individual, little guy grows all up and eventually becomes an adult, he is faced with the harsh reality of actual existence, in the form of the most notable poem from this particular section, The Tiger. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the darkness of the night, who composed thy hand and eye? You know what? I have my phone around here somewhere. I can actually look this up. Yeah, there it is. By the way, those who are kind of confused about what's going on right now, that is Nico. Nico is the person that surprised you with your devil breakers and your different upgrades and such, both to V and to Nero and to Dante. The Tiger. Here it is. Figure I might as well just read the whole thing since I'm here. While I go and I upgrade V here.
There's no such thing as too prepared.
Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart begins to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? I know I'm not really getting any live responses with this right now, but if we do end up going that route, I would probably ask in situations like this what I should upgrade. One interesting thing about this game is that before you purchase a move, you get the chance to try it out in this thing called the Void. Guillotine. Try. Anyways, back to the poem. What the hammer, what the chain, in the furnace was thy brain, in midair.
Right.
Work on that later. Let me just go back to the thing. When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Here's the key line, as it references that song from The Innocents. Did he who made the lamb make thee? Like, if life is supposed to be all great and everything, how can a earth that has something as innocent as the lamb have something as terrible and frightening as the tiger? Did he who made the lamb make thee? It makes no sense. But this is just what part of growing up, realizing that a place that is so amazing can also be so terrible. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the darkness of the night. What immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? Now I've probably taken up more time than I should have talking about Blake and Frankenstein, so I'll just wrap this up with a little discussion about Romantic era authors in the Americas. There are two in particular that you've probably heard of, actually you've definitely heard of if you live in the US because they're required reading in high school, and that is Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau, and Nathaniel Hawthorne. Henry David Thoreau was known as the foremost American Romantic poet of his time. He was a firm believer in the idea of self-reliance and a lover of nature. In fact, he wrote an entire collection of poetry known as Walden, which was based around his experiences living in a cabin near Walden Pond, out near the area of like Boston, Massachusetts. Oh, nobody. This'll be fun.
I'll be taking that back.
So,
You know your endless
In-
worshipping isn't making Sparta.
such a situation, he wrote all of these poems about his time near Walden Pond, and some of that poetry is considered some of the best works in the history of American literature. And we need to discuss Nathaniel Hawthorne because his novel, The Scarlet Letter, is considered one of the greatest pieces of literature written during this American Romantic era. You see, Nathaniel Hawthorne's descendants were all prominent members of the Puritan government or society that lived back in early Massachusetts in 1600s, early 1700s, Boston. So, Nathaniel Hawthorne crafted this tale, this story, about a woman who lives in Puritan New England who has an affair with the pastor Chillingsworth. So, throughout the course of the novel, she is shamed for being an adulteress and has to wear this scarlet A on her body to identify that she has committed this sin. The thing is that Chillingsworth, the man who is responsible in all of this, hides the fact that he was involved, and the entire community just like, oh, the man cannot be responsible for any of it. I mean, they know that a man has to be involved, but it can't be our beloved Pastor Chillingsworth. Now, during this whole time, Hester, the woman in this case, her husband comes home from Europe. Now, the only person in the community that really suspects Chillingsworth as the guy involved in this whole affair is, of course, the husband in this case. Of course, he knows that Chillingsworth is the guy, but rather than, just directly confront him, he sadistically just keeps gnawing at the guy as Chillingsworth's health, declines, making him suffer, really, for what he has done to the husband in question, and all the impropriety that the husband has suffered due to the cheating of his wife. And out of all of this, there's also this child that Hester has because of the whole situation. And unfortunately, she's there and she can't really do anything about the terrible situation she's in with her father and her actual, physical father. It's a very unique and very divisive piece of literature, at least back in high school. There were some people who loved it, some people who absolutely despised it, but it definitely left an impact wherever it was read. So, sorry this was maybe not as in-depth a look at the Romantic era as possible, but I thought it just an interesting thing to talk about, especially considering the proclivity towards Romantic era poetry that V here has displayed throughout the course of the game. So, thank you all for watching. If you could, like and subscribe, and hope to see you next time. Don't know what game I'm going to be streaming or sharing or whatever, but it will definitely be a time. So, See y'all later.
Seems this sword is still too strong.
So,